And welcome back, everyone, to Overtime. As we teased earlier, we have a special guest here on the interview couch with us. He's none other than a man that bleeds green and white, if you will, Mike Kinnison, former longtime Delta State baseball coach who's now the athletic director at his alma mater. And we're so honored to have him be a part of Overtime as our special guest. And as I said earlier, Coach, before we started here on the couch, if I had the time, which we don't, but if I had the time, it would probably take me about 20 minutes to run through all your list of accomplishments. But just to name a few, he's a Mississippi Hall of Famer. He is a national championship coach. He also played in the national championship as a player, and now, once again, he is serving as athletic director at his alma mater. Again, Coach, thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule to join us here on Overtime this evening.
Thanks, Stephen. Always glad to be with you. Thanks for all you do for us at Delta State, and glad to be here.
And as I mentioned, Coach, your love for Delta State runs very deep when you consider you played there, you coached there, now you're serving an administrative role there. What does it mean when you look at Delta State as a whole, when you look back at the time spent there and the time that you're spending there now?
Well, it's always had a great impact, not just on my life, but my family's life. My wife and I met there back during my student-athlete days when I was playing. Our children grew up in Cleveland and went on to Delta State and got multiple degrees there. So it's, as I said, been very impactful in my life. But I look back on that window when I was there as a student-athlete, and it's hard to believe it was over 40 years ago in some ways, and a few more than that, really. But I just see who I was when I went there, and I see the difference in the change that was made in me as people influenced my life. There were, of course, coaches, but there were teachers and professors, administrators, people in the community that really, I think, helped shape and form me in a positive way.
And you go back to your time at Delta State when you started there. Interesting story. You were an All-American shortstop at Delta State, but before that, you were actually cut from the team when you arrived there trying out that initial tryout under the legendary Boo Ferris. It almost reminds me of that Michael Jordan story. He was cut from his high school basketball team, but went on to achieve greatness. Take me back to that time when you were cut. Did you think about giving up? Or what gave you the drive to come back that following season?
Well, I see it as a big adjustment phase for me. I came out of community college, transferred, was a walk-on there, and there was really a lot of good players at the time. I didn't quite realize, what you had to do to compete at that level, and I think that was the biggest adjustment for me through that process of getting cut, sitting out a year, kind of, regrouping, swallowing your pride, and going back out again. I realized how important the competition aspect was. And took a little bit different perspective when I went through it the second time. Had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. That kind of became who I was as a player and made a big difference for me. I needed that. I didn't have, maybe all that just natural talent, so I needed to learn to compete, and I needed to learn to play under adverse situations, and so it worked out. It worked out, and thankful for that. Had 2 great years there with a lot of great teammates, and played in some really successful in an era of Delta State baseball in 77 and 78, where we went 2 straight years to the World Series.
And I know too, Coach, when you were at Delta State, you graduate, here you are with a degree in mathematics and education, and then you earn your master's as well. But I was curious because when I looked at your bio, there wasn't anything mentioned about pursuing a professional career. Was that something that you were considering once you were done with Delta State, or were you done with baseball as a whole as far as a player when it was time to graduate and move on?
No, I was like probably every player I've coached, would love to have played professional baseball. Probably was a little bit short. I had some workouts, and probably just wasn't right place, right time. But thankfully, I had the educational background to fall back on, and went into coaching and teaching, and it was the right fit for me. Yeah, I would have loved to have played professional baseball. It didn't work out, but I think God's plan was for me to get into coaching and feel like that's where he directed me.
And so you began coaching first right out of college. You were telling me before we started here on the couch at Lee Academy, and your journeys also took you over to Jackson Prep and then Madison Central. Tell me a little about maybe that aspect of your life and how that helped shape and mold you as well.
Yeah. Well, you know, at that time, that was my focus, was coaching in high school and being a high school coach. Yeah, I guess somewhere along the line I had a dream or ambition of coming back to college and coaching, maybe not at Delta State, but I would certainly have loved to have had the opportunity. But I had settled in. I had 3 great stops at Lee Academy and then Jackson Prep for an extended period of 11 years there. Went over to Madison Central and kind of felt like that was going to be where I settled in, and that would be where I coached. I coached high school football and then head baseball coach and at each of those stops, and was really fortunate to be in some good situations, and then had the opportunity to come back to Delta State as the assistant in 1994 and served as the assistant for 3 years and then the head coach for 23 more.
Wow. Well, Coach, I tell you what, we're going to take our first break of this interview portion, but we'll return. We're going to go back actually 20 years ago, talk about that national championship team that you coached back in 2004 at Delta State. Coach Mike Kinnison, I've always referred to him as Coach Mike Kinnison, here joining us on our interview couch as part of Overtime tonight. We'll be right back with much more.